Are the Tigers overrated by the College Football Playoff Committee? Well, I don't think so, but one national writer seems a little bit perturbed about it. So let's talk about that and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball, here with you with a rare, actually live episode here of Locked On Mizzou. So coming up later in the program, I am going to be taking listener and viewer questions live. Well, I suppose really viewer questions more accurately being live here on YouTube. If you're listening to this, hey, hit the notifications bell, subscribe on YouTube. You'll be notified next time I do a live show like this. Before I get started, I do want to say that you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I do want to talk later about, I think, hey, Missouri might actually be a bet this weekend against Mississippi State. I've got some special ones to look into over on FanDuel as well. But I want to first start by addressing whether Missouri has been overrated, overranked, whichever way you want to put it, by the College Football Playoff Committee. The Tigers remaining 23rd in the CFP rankings, despite a loss to South Carolina on the road. Obviously, a really close loss, a heartbreaking loss for Missouri. At first glance, that doesn't seem to be something to be terribly outraged about, I have to say. Number one, losing to South Carolina, the way the Gamecocks have played lately, especially in Williams-Brice, nothing to hang your head about whatsoever, and doesn't seem like it should be something that's terribly punished. And on top of that, Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic. The only three-loss team that is ranked ahead of Missouri, by the way, is in fact the South Carolina Gamecocks. That sure seems pretty fair to me. So if you're going to move down Missouri, you got to move somebody ahead of them. So no offense to true son Barry Odom, by the way, but it is the common college fan, the casual college football fan, supposed to be incredibly outraged because two-loss UNLV, whose best win is probably against the dreaded Kansas Jayhawks, by the way, that the Runnin' Rebels are one spot behind the Tigers. That's supposed to be a massive outrage because what exactly? They have two losses versus Missouri's three. I just don't think comparing those schedules to each other is really a fair comparison. Now, that is actually consistent. That thought process, anyway, is consistent with how the College Football Playoff Committee really did most of its rankings, because really just avoiding losses, racking up as many wins as possible was the biggest advantage of all, at least so far. So it's interesting that strength of schedule, while obviously very subjective in a lot of ways, it is something that has to be taken into consideration, because obviously this entire discussion at a certain point is subjective. I will say the one objective measure that the committee has been about as consistent with as it realistically can is head-to-head matchups. For instance, the fact that Oregon beat Ohio State, that's carrying a lot of weight right now. Georgia, on the other hand, not quite enough weight to be ahead of Texas, of course, at this point. But going further down the list, we'll just go from, I talked about number 24 UNLV. How about number 25 Illinois, another team that Missouri fans are probably familiar with? Well, another three-loss team, just as many as Missouri's. Again, wins over Kansas and Nebraska, carrying a lot of weight in this case. A mediocre Michigan team. Yes, they're defending national champions. Technically, that is not the same roster as last season, nor, just as importantly, the same coaching staff. Now, The thing is, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm not trying to convince anybody that Missouri's resume should be blowing anybody away right now. And it is true that to some extent, perhaps Missouri's preseason expectations are helping its resume out to some extent, just the national perception there. I'm not saying that there isn't a point to be made there. What I'm saying is it doesn't matter. Who cares? Because first of all, Missouri clearly doesn't have a chance to make the college football playoff. Neither does Illinois. And more importantly, UNLV had its chance to make the playoff when it played Boise State a few weeks ago. And they lost. I would have loved to have seen Barry Odom and his squad pick up the win there, but they didn't. And even with an additional loss, an overtime loss at home against Syracuse, the Runnin' Rebels still had a path to the playoff in this new 12-team environment to get that 12 seed, that, hey, we're the best non-Power 4 team. You know, they still were in there with one loss. So if you're a fan of this model, that's a win for you. It definitely kept the season a lot more interesting for UNLV than it otherwise would have, and certainly the most interesting UNLV season in, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years, perhaps their entire existence. So that's a good win for them. But I think this whole thing of, oh my God, how did Missouri not tumble down the rankings from 23 to wherever else? That just seems like a weird hill for Nicole Auerbach or anyone else for that matter to die on. And you got to say, I will say this is something I've been talking about on this program for the last few weeks. Obviously, the Gary Pinkel mode and model, I should say, of scheduling is very much alive and well. If you're Missouri, yeah, the Kansas game next year, boy, we've talked a lot about Kansas games so far at the top of the program. I deeply apologize, as all of you know. But seriously, obviously the Kansas game it's going to sell out next season. I would guarantee that. An interesting game that's going to have a lot of eyeballs, certainly in Missouri and Kansas. But going forward, generally speaking, it sure seems like the college football playoff is telling us, the committee is telling us that, hey, just rack up those wins. Schedule the easiest possible schedule. And if maybe you can go too far with that, hey, get one group of 4 team that is sort of mediocre. In that case, actually maybe Kansas is the perfect team to schedule in the future. So the thing is, if you're a Florida State fan and you're seeing how this is playing out, you've got to be furious right now after being left out of the playoff going undefeated. But you know what? I think the Seminoles have some other problems that are more pressing at the current moment. And speaking of the current moment, obviously, this is mostly about the past, talking about rankings. Let's talk about the present. The good news is for Missouri playing Mississippi State this week is, number one, I'd say Mississippi State is the worst team in the SEC. That doesn't mean they're completely bereft of talent, but the Tigers should certainly expect a victory coming up here against the Bulldogs. And with Brady Cook being upgraded to probable, that's as good and as positive of a status update as you could possibly get, I think, at this point as a Missouri fan. So let's talk about Cook. Let's talk about Mississippi State and their true freshman quarterback coming up here in just a second. Does State have a chance to pull the upset? Well, I'm going to get to all of that coming up here in just a little bit. But first, I want to tell you about Mint Mobile, because I love a good deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of sharp, pointy nails to get through it, nor am I going to attend a KU football game just to save some money. No, it has to be easy and not blood-stakingly painful. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it, and it turns out they're right. It really is easy to get wireless for $15 a month. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. There you'll see that right now all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. That's mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. So it sure looks like Mississippi State is going to be starting a true freshman at quarterback once again. So a kid who, in Michael Van Buren Jr., who's not unaccustomed or totally inexperienced at the position. In fact, he's been thrown to the wolves already. Started at Texas and against Georgia as well. A former 4-star kid out of high school from Baltimore. But in his previous game against Tennessee, a definite, formidable pass rush and defense are the Volunteers, to be sure. It's just hard to trust that young man in the passing game. If Missouri's able to stop the running game, as it did at times fairly well against South Carolina, and then at other times, well, down the field, and once Lenora Sellers escaped the pocket, the tackling for the Tigers left a lot to be desired. So I think containing Michael Van Buren, the quarterback, in the running game is going to be key. And also Davin Booth has been running the ball at tailback really well for Mississippi State too. A middling offense, though, is Mississippi State. The problem is they're just absolutely wretched on defense this year by really all accounts, by all metrics, whatever you want to call it. If you want to look at the traditional stats, well, they're 120th or some odd like that in total defense nationally. And then you look at S&P Plus, the more advanced statistics that take success rate and schedule and all that kind of stuff into play. Well, then they're 97th nationally. Not exactly something to write home about. So a difficult schedule for Mississippi State, still not holding up its advanced statistics very much. So a bad defense going along with a middling offense, to me, this is a pretty good spot for the Tigers. I mentioned FanDuel Sportsbook at the top of the show. Well, over there, -7.5 are the Tigers. Just not a lot of reason to believe in Mississippi State this week. Obviously, there are things that Missouri can do better. The coaching staff can do better. Eli Drinkwitz can do better. But no doubt I think Missouri's going to be focused on winning this football game, and I think ultimately they are going to win this football game relatively comfortably. And I think, again, this is a good spot for Missouri because a Mississippi State team that has tried hard as well. They're just simply not good enough. They haven't won a game in the SEC yet. And sure, on one hand, you'd think this may be Mississippi State's last chance to get a win in the SEC. I think, if anything, based on human nature, I think next week, the Egg Bowl against Ole Miss, the huge rivalry game, I think, if anything, if you see a surprising effort put forth, it could be against Ole Miss, at least at the beginning part of that game. But against Missouri, I know it's senior day for the Bulldogs, but still, it's just hard for me to believe that they're going to be more motivated than a Missouri team that, despite falling short of its own stated goals of making the playoff, I still think has plenty to play for here. So, to me, give me the Tigers to win and also cover that 7.5-point spread as well. I do believe in Missouri this week. But I will say, one thing I don't believe in so far, just based on experience, is the Tigers getting off to a fast start. So, under 12.5. That's the total for both teams in the first quarter, 12.5 points. To me, take the under there. I believe more in the Tiger defense in this particular matchup. And the Tigers have just shown that offensively, well, they've gotten off to pretty slow starts in the 3 SEC road games, just 6 total points. Maybe it's 3. Do we score 3 or 6 in the first quarter? I know it was 6 in the first half last week against South Carolina. Either way, no touchdowns, and I'm going to bet on that trend continuing. And thanks for being patient as I have to occasionally take a breath and take probably more importantly, a drink of water during these live shows to keep the old throat lubricated, mind out of the gutter. Anyway, so is it time to go to the audience yet? Let's see who is joining me right now. Yes, good old JB, one of my everydayers. How's it going, JB? Thanks for joining me here. Didn't even give the guy a heads up, but here we are. Appreciate you as well. And right now, again, if you're joining me live on YouTube, by all means, fire it at me, whatever questions you want, football, basketball. You want to know some personal stuff about the Central Scrutinizer, I am all about it. Well, JB says, our recruiting class dropped with the last update. We're down to 19 with the decommits. Well, that's not really a question, more of a comment. And, I think I'll start to get concerned about the Missouri football recruiting class if one of the next two following guys decommits. Talking about Lamont Rogers, first of all, from Mesquite, Texas, the big offensive lineman. I'd be really worried if he decommits. There's been rumors for a while now that Texas A&M may be his destination. And anytime a guy who's been committed to you for a good long while is taking visits elsewhere at this point in the process, well, I think like we saw with Ryan Wingo, who everybody thought was a Missouri lean. That was the reporting that was going on anyway. But then last second, he decides to go to Texas. This is the type of thing that can happen more and more probably in the NIL era, where new offers can come in, or certain players and certain families and their representation, all the people around them are going to probably wisely, in my opinion, decide, hey, you know what? Let's use the leverage that we have right now. Let's use the power we have right now to get the best offer that we can. That just strikes me as intelligent. I don't see why really everybody wouldn't start doing it. That's what agents are for in pro sports. That's what teams and players do all the time. They use leverage and that type of thing against each other. That's how you get paid, by the way. I don't know. That's just my point there. JB also says, still bummed out about the loss last week. 1 minute changed the entire season. Well, potentially, JB, do you really think Missouri was going to make the playoff even if it won out at 10-2? I think it's possible. I don't think it's a guarantee. I think it may have been less likely than not, considering how Missouri performed poorly in those 2 other games against Alabama and Tennessee. I don't know. Reasonable people can certainly disagree about that. But you know what? Coming up here, I'm going to take more of your questions live here on the program in just a little bit. But you know what? First, before we get there, I want to tell you about our newest sponsor, Skylight, because this time of year, I often struggle to find the perfect gift for the holiday seasons. Maybe gift giving isn't your love language. You overthink it and wind up, well, dropping the ball, let's be honest. Well, I've got a great idea for you. I've got the perfect gift. Skylight Frame is the touchscreen digital photo frame your whole family is going to love. Upload thousands of photos with your phone and watch them appear in seconds. It's so easy to use. Setup takes less than 60 seconds. Seamless sharing. Invite friends and family to easily share photos via the free Skylight mobile app or email, no account or subscription required. The touchscreen is really a game changer. Swipe through photos, tap to see new photos, tap the heart button to say thank you to the sender. And now, as a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $20 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/college. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/college. Get $20 off your purchase now at skylightframe.com/college. And of course, FanDuel is the place to tackle the NFL action this season. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch during the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And JB just dominating the chat right here. This is what I get for going live and not telling anyone. Hey, JB, thank goodness you're here to save my butt. Don't get me wrong. He's asking, are there any guys we're trying to flip? Michigan guys are dropping like flies, and we're on a few of their guys like Washington and Babalola. Well, Washington being a receiver, Babalola being a big-time offensive lineman prospect. I don't know. That's tough. That's really tough. I'm not the recruiting expert, to be honest with you. I'm just going to be basically parroting what I tend to read from Gabe DeArmond and others who follow high school recruiting a heck of a lot more closely than I do. I would say anything is possible. I would say Washington, based on, again, just putting the tea leaves together, all that good stuff. I think the Washington kid at receiver is a more likely flip than Babalola at this point. JB also says we'd be number 18 in the college football playoff, which is where South Carolina is now with a victory. We'd need to move up 7 spots in 2 weeks. We had a 33% chance to make it, according to Vegas, before the South Carolina game if we won out. So I think we had a shot. Hey, first of all, get out of here with all of those stats and facts. I don't like you ruining my argument whatsoever. But no, seriously, you make a good point there, and there is no doubt that Missouri would have had a chance. Just seems like, man, 7 spots in 2 weeks. It's not just 7 spots, though. The problem is with that calculation, or I guess I should say my skepticism with that calculation is that it's not just that Missouri would have to vault all of those teams. I think they'd specifically have to get into the top 4 or 5 of the SEC. Probably likely the top 4 based on everything I'm reading. So that just seems difficult. It just seems difficult to imagine a world where Missouri would vault one of Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss as well, all 5 of those teams. It's hard to imagine a scenario where even if Missouri had beaten South Carolina, again, not saying it's possible, Ole Miss is probably going to have to drop one of these last 2, of which they're going to be significant favorites here. So I don't know. That seems like a bit of a stretch to me as well. Finally, another question here. Do you think the basketball team will make the tournament? If so, a deep run. As we sit here today, I can't say I think Missouri's going to make the tournament. I'm still holding out hope because it is so early in this season, and there is a lot of time here for this Missouri team to figure out exactly what the best version of itself is. So far, ironically, though, I think Missouri figured out the best version of itself immediately. The first half against Memphis, I think that was the best version of Missouri, a team that leaned into its size and its athleticism and got out in the fast break as much as possible. Because here's the thing. Missouri, I think, is going to struggle in the half court to some extent all season offensively. I don't think this is ever going to be a great offensive team in the half court. But I will say this. I do think there's a chance that this could be a good team if they run. And by run, I don't mean Missouri has to get a layup or a dunk every single time it gets in transition. If anything, just get the ball into the front court more quickly. Get some cross matches, get some mismatches. That's what happens when you play faster and you play fast break basketball, and not just by dribbling either. This will be on the big guys in a lot of ways too if this is how Missouri decides it wants to play. But getting rebounds, first of all, then outlet passes up the court, and then guards deciding to advance it up to the next player as well. The quicker Missouri gets into its stuff, I think the better matchups it will get. It's not just about always getting the layups. It's actually about setting yourself up for a little more obvious action in the half court. That's just my humble opinion. Listener Steven asks, Drink has shown he can recruit NIL-motivated athletes, but has he proven he can coach them? Well, I think, that depends on, in my opinion, what do you mean by coach? There's a lot that goes into coaching. I think in terms of motivating guys, like you said, NIL-motivated, well, I don't know that that's completely fair. I think guys are motivated to play football for a lot of different reasons beyond just NIL. I mean, certainly guys have been playing college football for decades before NIL and playing to the extreme limit of their abilities. Nobody ever worked harder than Brocco Levo, for example, from back in the day. But, I do think it's fair to ask if Drinkwitz has developed some of the young players as well as he should have, because while certainly it's easy, obviously Luther Burden's developed, Brady Cook developed, Cody Schrader developed. I'm not saying there's been zero development, but maybe there have been enough perceived misses so far, enough four-star guys that haven't seen the field significantly enough yet that you wonder, maybe Missouri, maybe there is something a little bit missing here. I'm not ready to jump to that conclusion just yet, but I definitely think it's fair to ask that one for sure. And you know what? Finally, let's get out of here. One more question. Is Kirby Moore gone after this season? If I had to guess, I think Kirby Moore will be back as the Missouri offensive coordinator next season. That's just my humble opinion right now. I don't think Kirby and the Missouri offense, which took a little bit of a step back this year, obviously, I'm not sure that he did enough to warrant a head coaching position this offseason, and or just, an LSU type of offer, that type of big name program, the Blake Baker lateral move. I can't stop bringing it up, people. But just, for example, something like that, I can't really see that coming up this offseason for Kirby Moore either. So if I have to guess, this will be year 3. I think year 3 of Kirby Moore as the Missouri offensive coordinator will be next season. So, you know what? That'll wrap it up for me on this special live edition of Locked On Mizzou. I think I should do a better job of letting the fans know in advance, hey, I'm going to go live. I'll go live at this moment and say, well, bring the questions, all that good stuff. Give some people some time to think about it. That'll be good. But thanks to everybody who weighed in anyway. Certainly appreciate you. Could have gone a lot worse. That's for darn sure. Thanks for making the show your first listen. And you know what? Check out the SEC Squad show. That'll be on this feed tonight for you listeners and you viewers as well. really had a fun time on the SEC squad this week. They were giving me crap about the Rock M, and you know what? We made a long-running joke about that throughout the episode. So some good football analysis and some fun as well. Check it out on the SEC squad. Until then, I'm John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.